All right, well, we are here to wrap up the day and a half by talking about, how we think about the three themes that we've heard over the course of the 2 days, what some of our advice is about how you think about managing through those themes or addressing what you do about it. And then we'd love to also hear from you. What are some of the learnings and aha moments that you've had as well? So you know what? I'm pressing the wrong button. I'm going to turn it on and off repeatedly instead of advancing the slide. Okay, so there's three themes that have come up through multiple of the presentations over the past 2 days. The first is managing through uncertainty. I think I kicked off the program yesterday afternoon talking about uncertainty and the unprecedented times that we're continuing to live and manage through. The second theme is driving AI impact. Ray joked at the beginning of his last session that we have to have AI mentioned at least 50% of the time throughout. So, Scott Gruer actually started us off yesterday talking about how we think about the four dependencies of growth: strategy, operating conditions, talent, data, and insights, and how AI might impact those. And then we've certainly talked about how AI impacts the commercial stack as well as your frontline sales manager talent. And then finally, intention and alignment. And what we mean by this is, how are you making choices? What are the bets that you are placing? How are you managing through these times? What are you intending to do or not do as a result of any of this uncertainty and the disruption that AI is causing? And then what are you going to do? How are you going to align with your executive teams, with your boards to manage through these elements? So actually, I'm going to go back really quickly. So each of us are going to talk about one of these themes. And so I'm going to kick us off by talking about uncertainty. So when we think about managing through uncertainty, the first thing that we consider is, what is your fact base? What is the why behind the what? We know some of the uncontrollables that are happening. We understand the factors that we could call gravity that are impacting the work that we do. But in each of our markets, we're also encountering uncertainty, both from the macroeconomic indicators, from changing buying behaviors. Brian talked to us at length about that, changing seller behaviors, where's the friction in the system. And so what we recommend to start with is to think about the why behind the what. Why are these things happening? What is the impact that this will have in your organization? And what are the scenarios and scenario planning that you should consider to understand what your options are and how you're going to address them? If you have these options prepared and ready, then as these scenarios unfold, you can pivot and you can make some of these choices faster. We also recommend starting with the basics and ensuring that your house is in order. When we talk about the four corners of the diamond, the strategy, the operating conditions, data and insights, and talent, where are the areas that you're having those challenges in your organization today, regardless of the things that you can't control? What are the things that you can control, and how can you ensure that you're getting your house in order before you're even considering some of the other more complex things to manage through? So this is how we think about uncertainty. This is how, when we work with our clients, we help to understand the current conditions that they're operating under, the fact base of what the challenges are in their organization, and then what we can do to help them. But I'm curious for the audience, as we've certainly been talking about uncertainty quite a bit for the last 2 days, what are the things that you've thought of differently, or what are the things that you considered differently in terms of how you are planning to work within those conditions? Oh, I can always count on this table.
Well, first of all, a couple of us were talking during break about just how powerful the start of the session was, including this graph and how uncertainty it was. And then one of the things that you guys continue to deliver time after time is the collection of the results of what you're seeing at the C-suite, and how it echoes to a lot of experiences. And so that's been very valuable. You guys always deliver on that, so thank you.
Yeah, one of the things we started doing a couple of years ago, because we could see there was some uncertainty in our space, because we're playing a red ocean. We started getting good at understanding our business and kind of like JD said, the fundamentals, but the underlying stuff, and started to telling hard truths to leadership who in the past were, oh no, it's okay, I just need the resource in place. And, we've started the last couple of years being really, candid. Okay, that country there, it costs us twice as much to sell as we're getting in. Why do we have them? Because when these things hit, what we don't want to do is cut, say, the financial services team that are doing a great job. We've got to do things that are uncomfortable, so let's do it really data-driven. So we've put a lot of effort into that, and this is confirming that to me, that we just need to keep building those models, maybe smarter models, but for the moment, even in Excel, it shows us some really insightful stuff about our business that people don't want to look at.
I love that. I think that's so true. When things get tough and you start to have those tough conversations that you don't want to have, when you have to make difficult choices, it always seems that folks start with maybe a gut feel. It seems like this is the area that we need to focus on, but bringing it back to the data helps you not only understand what the impact is of any of the actions, but also what the risks are, and how much it will even make a dent. I find sometimes I've been in organizations where we might spend a whole lot of time talking about making incremental cuts that then you have to pull back on later, and it ends up costing you more than perhaps some other scenarios or other options would have. That's a great one, Ian. Kelly?
And I would also say, I think in times of uncertainty, focusing on your clients and what do your clients need is also a great way to get team members who might be stuck to actually start mobilizing again. And I know during the pandemic, we sort of came up with a hashtag SOWO for how are we going to sell our way out. And we really said, what do our clients need from us right now? And those are the parts of the portfolio we focused on, and it got people moving again, because I think sometimes sellers in particular can get really stuck. They start blaming the economy and they don't want to move, and it becomes a downward spiral. So bringing it back to the clients.
No, that's such a good one. Brian, I think that was a lot of, the content that you were presenting earlier is, as sellers, we so often think inside out. What do we want? How do we want the clients to behave, both from a product market fit as well as, in terms of what we're hoping to accomplish in the sale. But, thinking client first and bringing those perspectives back, it's perfect. Any other thoughts or takeaways or advice about managing through uncertainty? Okay. Tony, you want to talk about AI?
Sure. So
You'd love to, I know.
when you started talking about impacts in the last, I was like, is she encroaching on my space? What am I going to talk about if she goes to that? Because I have attention issues, I'm now standing. I've seated about the longest I can. All right, so AI into your business. Here's one of the interesting challenges that talking with many of you. A lot of companies that we work with are, like Ian and I were talking about this last night. They're putting AI into their products for your customers, not your business. That's one of the biggest challenges we're seeing right now in the go-to-market space. People are rushing to put AI into their customers, not into their business, and they're wondering, when's it going to help us? And boards and CEOs are saying, when are we going to get the efficiencies from it? And the answer is, well, maybe as soon as we do something, as opposed to talking about doing something. So this is one of the interesting challenges, I think, that we're going to have to figure out, because just like there's legislation right now around AI and possible, like what do we need to do to control it? We need to think the same way from a commercial perspective. Because one of the things we were talking about in the breakout in this room yesterday was AI could also be very bad for you. I mean, think about some of your most productive reps. Some of you all have reps who work in your organizations who are making 7 figures, selling tons of software, widgets, whatever you sell. And the reality is now AI gives you the ability or the challenge of potentially treating them like they're a rep straight out of school. Like they're an ISR that everything they're doing at every minute of the day. And you have to resist the urge to interrogate everything that they're doing, but you have to find ways to turn it into coaching. Those were some of the themes that you heard from both of our guest speakers. If you go to JD's comments or BJ's comments, interesting, that's a theme. We're going with people with, abbreviated names. So anyways, random. Here I am losing my attention. Okay, so anyways, back to the focus. So both of them were very basic. I was texting with JD today, and he said, "Hey, I hope the conversation wasn't too basic." And then when I was talking to BJ at the end, he's like, "Hey, man, I hope it wasn't too fundamental." That's what this business is all about. At the end of the day, what we do in a commercial engine, we can introduce technology, we can have disruptive things that are coming at us on AI, we can have black swan events and gray rhino issues and everything else that goes on. But at the end of the day, selling is a basic concept. And when you get down to the fundamentals, you get through the fundamentals with speed, with integrity, with consistency, results follow, or they don't if you don't do those things. So AI needs to be the tool. It's the check and the balance. That's the way it needs to be leveraged. And then I loved the conversation that was going on earlier about how do you turn it into something where the CRM is serving up the information as opposed to asking them to input more information. We don't want to turn AI into the form of reverse leverage, right? It needs to be insightful and helpful as opposed to a reporting tool. We've already got enough reporting tools. I don't know if y'all know, but people like to look at reports and ask what you're doing as opposed to use reports to help you. So to me, that's the biggest challenge. That's the biggest challenge that we've got to solve for, and that's the biggest takeaway that I think I've been hearing through these 2 days. But we've also been talking about that, so I don't want to be drinking our own Kool-Aid, and I wanted to really, just like Alicia did, open it up. And any takeaways from this group regarding AI? What's the one thing or things that you were like, I heard so-and-so saying that, and that seems really insightful. I got to figure out how I'm going to get that back to my team.
So one of my biggest takeaways was when I get back to the office, starting to think about how we're employing AI less on like a specific pre-call research basis, like with the AI agent that we saw before, or how we're going to use the conversational intelligence features in Gong. But I think the word that one of the presenters used was workflow. So how do I actually get these tasks embedded in what my sellers are doing anyway, and how do I get AI to actually evaluate that those things are being done and used? So thinking about how it all comes together holistically as opposed to the individual components.
Exactly. There could be certain stages of a process, right, that you could automatically exit. If one of them is doing a demo and said demo has occurred, you can actually populate and advance it on. So yeah, I think use cases like that where you can deploy agentic AI is going to be game changing, because that's going to truly create leverage and help for your field, not asking them to do another task. Yep, good feedback.
Just an extra one. Model context protocol. That was super interesting. I've already got Perplexity researching it for me. But yeah, the ability of AI tools to talk to each other and share data and similar, I think is going to be game changing. And it's nice that I learned that, didn't know about that, thought it was an issue. Sounds like someone solved the issue.
Yep. Another thing that I thought was interesting, I'm curious on any feedback, one of the panelists in the earlier breakout said, ask them to prove it. A lot of people are AI washing right now, but when you ask for actual proof, anyone got examples or stories of that where you guys have seen that yet, where you've tested and verified or tested and not?
So I'm just going to share an anonymous example that I heard about earlier
We
today.
might have heard. This is kind of like BJ's story about they might or might not have reported something.
But I was speaking to someone who's, so a little bit different. So instead of asking a vendor to prove, they are themselves building an AI-driven capability that they're taking to market. It doesn't yet exist, and they're selling it, because they're talking about the capabilities and the outcomes. But it's thinking about that tension between, innovation and proof of concept when it's still very human-driven, in the back end. And so I think it's interesting, right? Because I think some of us are in that mode, right, where we're creating the capabilities, and we know that the capabilities will be there, but we need to get clients to sign up for the capabilities maybe before they're there. And so you're inching your way forward. And how do you feel? So this wasn't us, but we're going through some similar dynamics ourselves. But it was interesting thinking about how do you make sure you're showing up to your clients with integrity and intention as you're promising the future that doesn't quite exist, but you trust it will. So it was an interesting, I think, flip of that.
Yeah, good one. I think BJ referred to it as selling ahead of the roadmap.
The aspirational roadmap.
Thank you. From an AI perspective, a couple of reminders that I took away: focusing on the fundamentals, and then actually focusing on the data that you have available in order to start driving efficiencies with AI. So just the basics of what we're asking our salespeople to do, the simple outreach emails and so forth, but how does that get really well documented, putting a process around that and start to drive efficiencies there? It sounds really simple, but when you really put structure around it, a workflow, a process, and then the data itself that you're using, that's where the complexity starts to come into play. I've got a potential client that I've been talking to that's in the process of building their own large language model and deploying AI as part of their inbound agents, as a part of their voice system. So they thought it was going to be a really simple thing, but once they started getting into all of the data, the workflows, and what they actually have the humans do and try to simulate that with the AI agents themselves, they found it to be very complex. And then there's regulations because they're in a regulated environment. And then it's the concern about data drift and model shift. So how do you maintain control of the data that you have in there, that it doesn't start to drift into other areas that you don't intend the AI to go and answer questions or provide information you don't intend it to, and the model shift, where the model is intended in one factor, but then it starts to shift into another. And so it's just a lot of these different things of, it's all possible, but if we just focus on the most basic fundamentals of AI for proof points, that's where we're going to start to see success, in my opinion, and an opportunity to start to see the efficiencies that we've all been promised. So great reminders here today, and then I've been applying it to some of the client conversations I've been having as they're trying to navigate it in their own way. So just a couple of comments. Yeah.
Interesting observation on your comment, too. Has anyone noticed that over the last 12 to 18 months, the emphasis when people talk about the human, we use the human a lot more. No, I mean, humans actually have to do this work. And I think that's going to be one of the keys. It's connecting the AI with the humans, because, this is still a relationship thing, like BJ said. We got to figure out how to enable the humans, not displace the humans. Common misconception is like, SDRs. Well, people are still going to want to talk to someone, but nurturing could very well be done by agentic. But someone's still going to want to talk to the phone. So there's things like that we're going to have to think about. So, Norma, how do we tie it all together?
So let's actually start with a question about intention. So in this room, we heard BJ talk about the 3 different choices that you have. One is put your head in the sand and kind of ignore what's happening. The other one is kind of get lean, cut. And the other is double down on the opportunities that you have. So show of hands, like your leadership or your organization, who's feels that they're head in the sand right now? Haven't really come up with a clear plan to deal with the uncertainty, just waiting it out.
Well, everyone wants to step onto that plank.
All right, so who's going more on the cost cutting? Let's kind of be conservative in our approach. So, okay. How about the other? Let's take all the opportunities we can and just grow. Okay, so it's about half and half, which is pretty good, I think. So when we think about those choices, we think about what does that mean for our organizations and our alignment as RevOps leaders, as enablement leaders, as sales leaders, right? We may have to pivot a little bit and start working through the alignment. So here you'll see our diamond with the 4 growth dependencies. So let's assume that the growth strategy in some respects has been defined by the actions of your leadership. So now you have the other 3 elements left. The first is going to be the operating model. So I think, BJ talked a lot about coverage and capacity. So the first thing probably is to revisit your coverage and capacity and think about how your sales people and your roles specifically are aligned to, what it is that you're trying to do, whether that's expanding from the base, going back into your clients, or finding new opportunities in the market that might have opened up due to this uncertainty. And then the next dependency is really around the talent then. And I think this is a big lever for many of us, especially in this room, which is then I love what Kelly said about being buyer focused and finding your buyer empathy, right? So that's where it's an opportunity to take the opportunities forward by understanding what your buyers are looking for in this space and just relating to them. They always used to say in COVID, we're in this together, right? So it's the same sort of uncertainty mentality that we're focusing on. And what does that mean? It means the enablement, and in some respects, when things slow down, it's a great opportunity for enablement. You have a little bit of time, you have some space, and you have the opportunity to communicate with your leaders, which is another portion of this alignment, is really helping tie back, how is this going to help us as we navigate through this uncertainty? And then the last point, really around the data and insights, so I think many of you have brought that up already, is being the canary in the coal mine in some respects, finding those leading indicators that you can communicate back and being like, hey, we're starting to see these indicators that maybe our ICP is not so well aligned, maybe this segment is actually growing faster. I think the restaurant technologies folks have seen some growth in new segments happening really quickly. So all of those things is where you guys, the RevOps teams, have an opportunity to bring this alignment up to the leaders and communicate around those kinds of things. Of course, leveraging the power of AI along the way to, what someone says that AI has a way of seeing things that humans can't. And so a lot of times we rely on our intuition. It can be data-driven, but the patterns that AI can spot are ones that are not so easy to find for ourselves, and we're rooted in our own experiences and perspective, right? The focus group of one. So I think all of those things together really allow us to be intentional and drive some alignment. So another question for the audience, this time we'll pass the mic around, is, what is, as a leader in your particular area, one of the things that you're going to take back or do to help drive greater alignment, whether that's within the teams that you lead, the teams that you manage up for, or across the organization? Or something particular that you're working on in that space.
So you guys probably saw me mad snapping pics all the last couple of days, but I sent in the go-to-market alignment and the breakout. So those of you who are at the AI, it was the other one. But there were some really nice visuals in terms of the go-to-market alignment with the, and so I sent it to the VP of marketing and my RevOps leader, and we're having a discussion about it tomorrow. So thank you.
Yeah, so for those of you that weren't in that session, it was really about driving alignment between sales and marketing, which is not, it's all those handoffs. It's not just the systems, but it's also the people and aligning on what makes a marketing qualified lead, for example. Something really, again, foundational and fundamental. And then how you can also use AI to drive those connections across the entire lead to opportunity journey and make sure that everyone's aligned. So that was great. And again, you'll have access to these slides. So any other points of alignment or things you're going to work on? I love this table.
So I'm going to refresh my knowledge of how to speak to a CFO. And then I'm going to start working with our business unit leaders, the SVPs. Our CRO knows how to do that. I can think of at least half of our business unit leaders who don't think they need to do that, and they won't have a job in 5 years. I can't remember who said that. But yeah, they need to know that, and they need to get their heads around that now. So I need to work out how to get it in their heads. Yeah, I think it was BJ.
Okay, any other examples? I think we're good.
Okay, so one of the areas that we use, one of the models that we use, you've seen a couple of times over the past 2 days, it's our value creation compass. And so it's how we think about helping to categorize the folks that we're working with and understand what are their goals related to investment and related to growth. So Tony, as I think you've been an author of part of this over the years, it's evolved over the years. Do you want to orient us a little bit to how we think about this and use it?
Yeah. So first of all, I think we should all pay tribute to the fact that I believe this is the last slide. The last slide of the last slide deck.
Other than the logistics.
There might be a thank you slide somewhere, but that's, you don't have to read that
There's
one.
one more logistics.
So, all right, so this one, you guys saw it. You heard Gru, also known as Scott, talk about it at the beginning. This is the framework that we would encourage you all to take back to your teams. And the reason is because it helps drive alignment, if you will. And we've actually got a tool where you can actually submit this out to all of your executives, and it will give you actually their placements and the results. And it actually allows you to bring facts to the party. I mean, who doesn't love a good debate where you can actually bring facts to the party? So to orient you on this, I always think of it as a 2x2 because that's how most consultants think about it. But at SBI, we're different, so we don't make our 2x2s square, we make them round. So it's really a 2x2, albeit round. And the north-south axis, as we've talked about, is your growth rate relative to CAGR of your industry. The east-west axis is your investment on a percentage basis of S&M compared to your year prior. And the reason I say bringing facts to the party is you might have a plan to go somewhere, but you might not actually be operating in that way, i.e. realizing the results. A lot of companies like to say, yeah, we're up here, we're a growth maximizer, we're growing at faster rate than our peer group, and we're putting more money in than we did last year. And then what they actually realize is, well, about halfway through the year, we riffed a big chunk of the organization, we didn't realize our numbers, and we're actually operating down here, but we didn't know it. And that reminds me of one of my favorite phrases when I'm talking with clients, which is, we don't know where we're going, but we're making great time. And that's the normalizer that this can be for you and for your collective teams to drive alignment. Because at the end of the day, that's what you've got to do. You've got to decide what course are we on, and then your cheat sheet, if you're going to be truly pouring money into S&M and trying to outpace the market, you need to be developing and launching new products. You need to be entering or expanding into markets, and you need to be redesigning your go-to-market if you're going to be putting money into it. You probably just can't do more of the same. But conversely, if you're going the other way, if you've just been bought by a PE and a take private and you used to spend 52% of your revenue on S&M and now you got to pull it back to 30, you might be thinking about improving retention. You might be thinking about pricing and packaging, which is a common lever that happens after a take private. Or you might be thinking about a more efficient operation. So, this is where you kind of have a cheat sheet. If you set a course and set a plan aligned to it and then take the actions associated with it, and you look at this over time, it will allow you to stay aligned and create a check and balance for you and your collective teams on, are we actually realizing the results? And then that becomes the other challenge. This allows you to prioritize a few things. So I was having breakfast this morning with Sarah from Service Express. So just saw her in the lobby and just chose to sit down and intrude while I'm sitting there in my workout gear and have a cup of coffee, and we had a great conversation. And she was saying, one of the challenges they have, which almost every company has, is they're trying to do 70 or 80 different things, and planes are taking off, but they're not landing, and they're not getting it, pulled all the way through the system. This type of a framework is what we would implore you all to think about, because it helps get alignment, decide are the things we're doing in alignment to our strategy, and are we completing them before we're launching the next set of initiatives. So that's the takeaway and the orientation of this.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we were chatting about earlier is, kind of the question that we would pose to folks, which is, I do encourage you. I love the online survey, right, that you can take and then you can share with your peers so that you can get a readout of where everyone is, which is a great conversation starter or continuer. But one of the things that we were wondering is if some of the gravity forces that are occurring right now, the things that are causing uncertainty, the impact that AI is having on our organizations, will that have an impact on where you are within this quadrant? Do you want to be in one particular area, but gravity's pulling you, and kind of forcing you in another direction? I'm just curious how you feel about that. You're nodding away furiously here.
So I 100% think, especially, you know, the adoption of AI. I was just telling my new friends at the table that, like, my IT team can't land an IT platform. We're launching Microsoft 365, and we're not going to use Copilot, right? So that'll be just more extension. And when I think of sales productivity and what sales productivity can do on this spectrum, not to mention just our ability to get new products out faster, et cetera, I think once that happens, it will absolutely change the dynamic on here. And I think there's a will to get in certain places on here, but just moving probably not as quickly as we need to because of other force factors.
No, that's great. And I think, Norma, did you?
Can add. So I think what you're saying is basically you would move from this accelerated rate of growth and investment, you would move left because you're still accelerating your rate of growth, but you're slowing your rate of investment thanks to AI. So I think that makes sense.
Well, and we heard, you know, in the beginning of our conversation today that, you know, folks, Norma, when you posed the question about, are you stuck with your head in the sand? Are you staying the course and cutting costs, or are you trying anything and everything? You know, for the folks that are trying new things, right, that kind of lands you down here. You know, are you thinking about new routes to market? Where are you, you know, perhaps expanding, you know, how you think about revenue and what types of revenue that you're going after? So, you know, Tony, have you ever seen someone in more than, is it possible to be, you know, kind of straddling more than one or trying things in more than one quadrant at a time?
The first time I used this with a CEO, that individual actually lit up 8 of the boxes around the outer ring and said, this is what we're doing. And I said, great, what's your strategy? What is the overall strategy? Which one is your favorite child? And he's like, well, this business unit's operating down in quadrant 3 because we're replatforming it. This business unit is a new acquisition. So it is possible, and you can explain your way out of it, but I look at something like this as truth serum. What is the vision of the company, and what is the CEO's vision, and are we all aligned to it? And if we're not aligned to it, well, then we got to explain why, and it's a framework to ask, is that aligned to the overall direction of the company, or is it 15 people over in the Netherlands that you just have to deal with, it being,
Everyone keeps picking on the Netherlands. What do we have against?
I mean, he said it. He said, we got this thing. I can't get rid of it. I can't sell it. You know, and it's just, and maybe that's a quadrant 3 thing. And he's just like, you know, I just deal with it. But go ahead. Sydney. Yeah, that's kind of the next step. I mean, once you orient everyone to agreement on where we're going, then it's, okay, now how do we get there? Now how do we prioritize those, looking at it across a dimension of time to realization, level of effort, and size of the prize. And then that's the way you prioritize the initiatives, and then you rank them, and you execute them as fast as you can tick them off. Sometimes simultaneous, sometimes dependent on one another. So, you know, one time I used this with a client, and they were publicly traded right before take private. So I just plotted 4 years of their financial history. And I said, you were operating here, and then you went here, and then you went here, and then you went here. And oh, guess what? You just got bought by PE. They're going to want you to go here. Like, they're going to want to take cost out, and they're going to want you to return to growth. And it's like, that's going to be a tough challenge, looking at how erratic you've been. But again, that's where you bring the facts to the party, and you look at it on a year-over-year basis, and you sort of trend where it's at. And then you can think about, was it a particular macro thing that drug us into the bottom half because it was gravity and we couldn't control it? Was it, you know, something like what BJ had talked about, where we lost a bunch of reps? We could have controlled it, and then we had a whole bunch of unassigned quota on the field. Like, when you actually start looking at it over time, you can figure out, was it intentional? Did we get lucky? You know, and then that's the way I like to look at it.
The nice thing about the digital assessment is that it does take your financial data and basically plots where you are in the quadrant is one piece of information, and then when you ask all the leaders where they think they are, what quadrant do they think you're in. It's very interesting to see sometimes the actual financial data says something different than where everybody thinks that you are.
And if you really want to have some fun, have them take it, and I'll put their names on the slide, and I'll come in and facilitate the workshop for you. Now, Frank, why did you put yourself?
What were you thinking when you ranked yourself here, when all of your peers put yourself over here?
All right.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tony
you,
and
Alicia.
Norma. Appreciate it. So with this, well, we've got one more. Yeah, this is our wrap up. So these were the three things that we promised. We promised some actionable steps and a blueprint for growth. We promised some inspiration or access to inspiration collectively across the room, and a few new friends to call on. So last audience question, which of these resonated most with you, and how? You don't have to pick. How many of these did we tick off? You know, how many, let's do this. Everybody's tired. How many folks feel like they have a plan? They have some actionable steps that they can do starting tomorrow morning. Excellent. And then the inspiration and the friends, I think as much from the content as from the folks in the audience and the conversations that folks had in all of the breakouts. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Just want to remind you that all of the content is coming. So you're going to get an email with access to everything that was presented. So you can also check out the breakouts that you didn't get a chance to attend. Feel free to share the videos with your teams. You know, if you want to take this back and, you know, use this as a learning opportunity with folks that you wish, you know, I heard a little bit of this at lunch, you know, like, I wish this person and this person were here to hear this. Feel free to do that as well. Please don't forget to fill out your yellow cards. And if anyone local or wants to travel with it, you're welcome to take the flowers. Amy said that we should feel free to take them with us, so anyone local, take them home, surprise your homemates, family with them. I can't take flowers anywhere because my cats just immediately eat them and then make a mess all over the house, but or die. That's what Norma said. I don't know. Luckily, I haven't had that impact. Again, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you staying with us for the full day and a half, and we look forward to next time.